So welcome to this webinar hosted by the Comité Professionnalisation of ICF-France within the Web Coaching Week, which is an initiative from ICF-France within the International Coaching Week created by ICF Global at the international level 10 years ago. And it's a week about sharing what is coaching, what is its impact and benefits. So I'm really happy to welcome Alicia Hullinger during this webinar because ICF Global realized, and you did great research last year. I was part of it. I was interviewed as a supervisor. And when you told me at the end of last year that you had results, I said, yes, we need to find a slot to share that with the ICF France community of coaches. So I'm really glad to have you with us. And now I'll let you go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gail, for inviting me to share this information with ICF-France. I'm really excited to share this information. And Gail, thank you so much for your participation and also making this happen. We've been talking about this for a few months now, and we finally have been able to pull it together. So thank you so much for your diligence to make this happen. It's important to do the research, but also share it with the coaching community. So this is a Staying Fit for Purpose, a study on professional development of coaches is the title of our presentation. So we have a full agenda today, and since we don't have the full amount of participants, we might look at our time and stop a couple minutes along the way. Otherwise, we will just make sure that we get to the end and save the bulk of the questions for the end, or comments for the end. So we're going to go over these different topics for the agenda. So I'll go over the study and then dive into some of the theoretical explanations for professional development, and then share the two key findings from the research, the coaching journey and the lessons learned from that journey. And then we'll look at some strategies from an application base as far as what coaches can do for their professional development based on these findings, and then wrap it up with a takeaway, and then talk about a call to action that hopefully you can take away for yourself for your professional development based on the research. So we'll just jump right in. So the purpose of the research was to really better understand how coaches maintain their skills after their initial training. So ICF has a code of conduct, and professional development is part of that code of conduct. And in order to maintain credentials, ICF credentialed coaches also are required to continue their education through continuing education credits. So we wanted to really understand how coaches are going through the professional development process. So our question simply was, how do coaches stay fit for purpose? And in order to answer this question, we did a qualitative approach to answer this question. So we did a literature review on professional development, on adult development specifically, and we conducted interviews. So looking at the literature review, these were the 6 areas that were prevalent in the literature as far as what professional development looks like for adults. And these are the concepts that have a lot of theory that has backed it and a lot of empirical evidence in the fields of adult education, cognitive psychology, and positive psychology. So these were the concepts that have some great theory and some great debate in the field, which advances knowledge. When there's healthy debate, it really helps to fine-tune the theory, and also empirical evidence to support some of these different concepts. So in the adult education field, stages of professional development was a concept that we took a look at. And this is an explanation on how adults learn by stages. So they advance from one stage to the next. And Bloom's taxonomy is one of the popular models that explains how adults essentially go from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. So it's a very hierarchical model when thinking about stages of development of adults. And then there's also the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, and that is stages that go from novice all the way to expert. And in that model, it has 5 different stages that adults progress, and at each stage, it's essentially taking on a new competency level or a new capacity. And so these stages are very simplistic for understanding. It doesn't necessarily get at the complexity that's going on, but it's one way to think about adult development. Then in the cognitive psychology field, Erickson is known for looking at practice as an important factor to professional development. And you may have heard of the 10,000 hour rule, that if you put in 10,000 hours of practice, all of a sudden you are an expert. So that is just one piece of the puzzle, but not the entire picture. So practice, yes, is important. If you put in 10,000 hours, you might not necessarily be an expert, but it will definitely contribute to the process. But what really is important, it's the quality and not necessarily logging in the hours. So it's really being intentional and deliberate and showing up and putting in the practice because it's about the process and not necessarily the quantity and number of hours. And the other piece to this puzzle is, so it's the practice, putting in the hours, and the type of practice, making sure that there's full concentration and that it's deliberate, but it's also that external feedback loop that is important. So in the coaching world, that would be seeking out a mentor coach, a supervisor coach, or doing peer coaching, because that external feedback serves as a feedback loop. And then there is the idea of motivation as something that is important in professional development as well. So humans, we all have this innate drive to grow, to learn, to create new things. And in this field, it's really how do we tap into that motivation in order to perform and in order to really learn and grow. So the field really thinks about motivation and our desire to learn and to create new things. So that was an area that we looked at as well. And then experiential learning in the adult development, adult education field, the Kolb learning cycle is very, very popular. And this really looks at experiences and how experiences contribute to our learning. So our everyday experiences can be part of our learning process. So we can take an event or an experience from our life and use that as a learning opportunity. So it's taking time to reflect and ask critical questions of that event, and then forming hypotheses or creating some type of meaning on what was going on in that event, and then taking those hypotheses and putting them to the test and experimenting to see if they challenge or support your hypotheses, and then revising from there. So this is thinking about our everyday experiences as something that can contribute to our learning. And this is also part of the Kolb learning cycle, but this is in the field of adult development as well, adult education, the reflective practitioner, and focusing on the reflection piece and how that is important to learning and growing. So reflection is taking the time to ask critical questions and consider questions on how and why things happen. So we will dive into this a little bit. I have a model that the ICF has been working on, and we'll share that in the strategies section. And then many of you are probably familiar with Carl Rogers in positive psychology, and he talks about a person-centered approach to professional development. So many of you probably think of the person-centered approach when you think of your client, but have you thought of the person-centered approach when you think of your own professional development? So this is about creating a safe space for growth, and the conditions that create that safe environment are, it's genuine, it's accepting, and it's empathetic, according to Carl Rogers. So I think many of you are very much focused on creating that environment for your client, but then thinking about your own professional development. How are you applying these things to yourself? So let's talk about the qualitative interviews. We did 25 interviews with coaches around the world. Most of them were ICF coaches, but we were able to interview a few non-ICF coaches. And out of those coaches, we had 11 expert coaches and 5 supervisor coaches. And the ages ranged from 41 to 68. And the experience based on hours ranged from 500 hours to 14,000 coaching hours. So well past the 10,000 mark of the expert level for putting in the hours. So the first theme that we really heard in this process is that professional development is a journey, just like coaching. Coaching is a journey, and professional development really coincides with the journey of coaching. And so in talking to coaches at all different levels, even beginning coaches could see a difference in their quality of coaching. And definitely hearing from expert coaches, we were able to see that this was a spectrum of learning and growth for the coaches. So in the beginning, coaches really had a more of a performance-based mindset when thinking about their professional development. So they were more focused on the task at hand and really making sure that they were asking the right question and that they were pausing at the right time and really thinking about the tasks in the coaching process. But as they became more developed in their own journey, they actually started to have more of a passion for learning and looking at the different obstacles and challenges as opportunities, and not necessarily focused on the task per se, but looking at it from a learning-based, holistic perspective. And so that meant that education and training in the beginning really just served a purpose to get that credential, to get that next credential. And that's really what professional development meant for many coaches in the beginning of their journey. But then as they grew and developed, they realized that professional education and training is lifelong, and it's about lifelong learning. And so this played out in how they focused on their own development. In the beginning, again, they were just focused on more shallow skills, theory, and knowledge and how to apply those. But then as they learned and they were going through their journey, it became more holistic, and they were able to tune into their mind, body, and spirit along with the application of skills, theory, and knowledge. And so that's going to show up in their confidence level and then also in their style. So in the beginning, coaches just talked about how they just felt very fixed in their coaching process, and their application of their models were very rigid, meaning they had to use their model from start to finish and had to make sure that they used all pieces of the model. And it was just very rigid in the beginning. But then as they grew and they recognized that the process was more than just following the model, they were able to tailor their approach to the client, to the situation. They were able to use the model in a way that served the client and not just to use it for the model's sake. And so this really showed up in their focus as well. So in a coaching session in the beginning, again, they were more focused on themselves and thinking about, oh, am I asking the right question? Am I listening deeply? Am I making sure that I pause at the right time? And so that they were very coach-centered. But then as they became more comfortable in their journey, they were able to shift that focus to the client and be client-centered. So they weren't having all of that chatter in their heads about asking the right question. They were able to tune into the client and really respond based on the client's energy, the client's thoughts, the client's emotions. And so this showed up, they mentioned, in their self-awareness as well. So they were not necessarily aware of all of this chatter that was going on in the beginning that was getting in the way of them being focused on their client. But then as they grew through their professional development, they were able to realize that, oh, I just have to get out of the way and let the client really do all the work. And so their self-awareness, they were able to tune into themselves and the client in a very interactive way. And then I really like this idea that one of the coaches, this is a term or some words that one of the supervisor coaches shared, is that vulnerability was in the beginning like masked grandiosity, meaning that coaches in the beginning felt like they needed to go in and just know everything. And they had to have all of the answers in a coaching session. And this really just got in the way of their vulnerability. But as they grew through the process, they were able to become more humble and realize going into a coaching session that you don't need to know everything, and that as a human, we don't know everything, and that's what it means to be human. So it's okay to go into a coaching session and not have all the answers and be okay, and to be able to sit in that feeling. And so this showed up in presence, which is a core competency for ICF coaches, in that they really had a presence that was not really genuine in the beginning. But as they grew, they were able to have a more authentic presence. And this then translates into the relationship, right? And so if the presence is not authentic, then the relationship is really shallow and rigid. But then as they found that authentic presence, they were able to deepen their relationship and have it more fluid and interactive with the client. And so the second overarching theme that really came up was that professional development is both a practice and a reflective practice. And we will look at each of these sub-themes one by one. So a practice is a way of doing. So professional development is a way of doing. And it's a lifelong journey. And so I'll share some of the quotes that really represent these themes. So professional development is a lifelong journey. As we saw, it's not just about serving a purpose to get a credential. It's something that's going to happen for beginning coaches, but it's also going to happen for expert coaches as well. It's about having the humility to realize that a coach is always in the process of learning, growing, and developing, as one coach shared. And then it's also modeling the way. So thinking about your clients as a coach, you are facilitating that learning and growing process. And so how are you really embodying that learning and growing process as a coach? And so this was something that came up, especially with a supervisor and expert coaches, talking about modeling the way. And I just really appreciate these quotes. If I'm not passionate about growing and developing my skills and continually have a learner mentality, a lack of learner mentality, I imagine, would show up in my clients. And I want my clients to feel like I'm in there with them. And another coach shared, if we as a coach don't know what it feels like to be a learner, how do we create the safety and trust to enable learning and change in our client? And so, you know, as a learner, how do we know how it feels so we can really know and understand that from the client perspective and model the way? And then the coaches really talked about professional development really was about deepening the belief in coaching. And as they really developed throughout their journey, they realized that coaching actually works. So their aha moments were about their own personal and professional transformation. And then deepening the belief really means deepening and believing in both the process of coaching and the client, and meeting the client where they need to be met. And then the second theme for professional development as a practice is that it's a reflective practice or a way of being. And professional development, reflective practice is an important part of professional development. And reflective practice really ties into the idea of presence. Again, that one of the core competencies of coaching. Reflective practice, coaches really think that it helps with the core competency of presence. So a couple quotes to share with you. Every day is a training ground for how I'm being present and what I'm being present to, and how that affects my questions, my listening, what I say to people, what I don't say. And then another coach shares, I show up with a Zen mind. I try to have nothing on my mind. I tune into the person and pick up on the subtle things, like I can smell the pheromones of the other person or sense when they are sweating or when their heart is beating faster. And so part of reflective practice is taking care of the self, and coaches really talked about how important this is and how this became more important as they continued through their coaching journey. And this became more of a theme that they recognized that taking care of the self is part of their own development, their own learning and growth. So as one supervisor shared, the value and importance of non-coaching personal and professional development for coaches is key, such as regular exercise, Tai Chi, meditation, yoga for physical, mental, spiritual well-being, psychotherapy, group process experience for emotional well-being and support. So from those findings, we took those findings and offer 5 strategies for staying fit for purpose for coaches. And there's plenty of other strategies, but based on the findings, these are the 5 that we offer for coaches to consider in their own professional development. So developing a robust reflective practice, seeking out external feedback, building a learning network, engaging in thought leadership, and experimenting and having fun. So with reflective practice, what is important about that is finding the time and the space to ask those critical questions of the self. And I think we live in very busy time and everything just goes very fast. So it's really carving out that time for your own reflective practice. And keeping a journal is definitely one way to help that critical thinking process for yourself. And there's plenty of research that shows that keeping a journal is very helpful for reflection. And the research shows you do not necessarily need to keep a journal on a daily basis, but just keeping a journal and jotting things down definitely enriches that type of practice. Research also shows the benefits of breathing, meditation, and mindfulness activities. So those are some other things that really tie into the reflective practice piece. And I wanted to show a model that the ICF is working on regarding reflective practice, because I think it helps break down what's going on in the process of thinking. So there's the reflection piece, which is observing the self and observing the emotions and thoughts and triggers that are going on in an experience. Then that is translated into an awareness piece. So after you've made observations of yourself, are you able to evaluate and assess accurately those emotions, thoughts, and triggers? And then from that is the self-regulation piece, which is really planning your next steps of how you want to behave and what type of emotions you want to manage when a situation arises again. And so you can do that. That reflective practice happens in the moment when an event or experience is going on in the moment, or you can take a past event or experience and go through that process. And then another piece of the reflective practice is the external feedback. And so again, external feedback is important because you can ask those questions of yourself, but then getting that external feedback loop is part of the reflection process. So it's having, one of the supervisor coaches shared, it's really having the courage to ask for external feedback, but also being open to hearing that external feedback. And there's a great book called Insight by Tasha Eurich, and she talks about seeking out that loving critic to ask for external feedback. So you want to ask somebody who will be open and honest with you, but also supports you in your growth process. So asking, can you give me some feedback on what I did? And then again, it's seeking out a mentor, a supervisor, coach, or doing peer coaching is another way to get some of that external, outside feedback with what you're doing and how you're experiencing coaching. And then, of course, you can ask permission to ask your clients. And a learning network, being in a day and age where we have so much great technology, you can connect with people virtually. You can also use social media to your advantage by following different professionals that inspire you and see what they're talking about, what they're reading, what they're doing, and then just joining different types of groups, LinkedIn or Facebook groups, to expand your network beyond your network in your everyday. And then thought leadership. It sounds like we have a few leaders in the group. By being a leader for an ICF chapter is a great way to take on a leadership role, or doing some volunteer work. And then teaching, researching, or writing on topics related to coaching that you want to share with the industry is another way to be a leader and to share those ideas and to really circulate that type of knowledge. And then finally, it's about experimenting and just going out there and trying new things, having fun, being curious, observing the world. And one of the MCC coaches, I remember her talking about how she thinks of the everyday as her playground. So she sees the everyday as an opportunity to practice the coaching mindset, the coaching competencies. She talks about she'll just take one of the 11 competencies and focus in on that competency, such as presence, for example, in her everyday and how that shows up, and she'll see it within herself, but she'll also observe it in others. What does presence look like in others around her? And ask questions and be curious in that process. So just to wrap up the main takeaways from the research, really what professional development is all about is cultivating that learning mindset. So instead of just focusing on continuing education to serve a purpose to get a credential, seeing that it's actually something that is continuous and lifelong, and it's part of the coaching journey. And then deepening reflective practice. How can you deepen your reflective practice from along this journey? Because expert coaches also have an opportunity to continue their own development, because they don't want to really forget the things that they have learned and go into a place of being delusional, for example, as the book Insight talks about. So it's really for everybody, from beginners all the way up to experts. And so to really practice, or to really help the reflective practice, these are some questions that I just like to pose to the group for you, and to think about the reflective practice process, and what did you learn today? What actions will you take next for your own professional development? And what are you committed to doing in the future for your professional development? So that can really spark a couple comments. We have about, 15 minutes left, and also so I just want to turn it over to the group at this time.
I can start if you want. Well, thank you very much for an insightful presentation, and for sharing your findings. Very, very interesting, both theoretical as well as very practical. The action that I'm going to take next for my professional development, I think, will be to start a journal. It's such a simple thing. We tell it to our clients, and how about doing it ourselves too? So, you know, in addition to the other things that I might be doing for professional development, supervision, you know, continuous development, more in a sort of more formal base, you know, going to workshops and stuff, but more the reflective practice part with a journal. That's going to be my step. Thank you for that.
Yes, that's great.
Okay, well, I'll go next. I think what I did learn today is that I should take also my own advice when it comes to me, and not just the clients, the advice I give them, which I think we all take such a, at least for me, it's such an honor to put something together and see it, how to work it, but actually say, hey, Tanya, how about you do the same for yourself, and not just journaling, something that I love to do. I love to read, but I feel like during the week they just don't have much time. And next, which is kind of linked to the next question, what action to take, is to really maybe per week, this say, okay, 2-3 hours, put them to the side, you know, do it when you're most fresh, productive, and read. Because I've got the books, you know, I just got to sit down and read. So that would be probably the next action I do. And take some of the medicine that I gave to others to me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So it's that modeling the way piece, right? Model the way.
Exactly.
Walk the talk.
Walk the talk. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, but thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you for sharing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Caroline. Thank you so much, Alicia, for a wonderful presentation, very interesting. And before I did learn, you know, many things today, and my action would be mainly writing, whether it's a journal or anything else, but that's the action that comes to my mind first. But I also have a question for you. When I'm thinking about everything that you said, as a supervisor, when I supervise younger, I mean more junior, not younger necessarily in age, but junior coaches, they also have very basic needs for professional development. There are many things that I'm thinking about this part about experiencing or experimenting, as you said. So what's your, what did your study say about that? Typically sometimes they have difficulties of outlining a contract and understanding, the ins and outs of that. I mean, just before getting to the reflective practice part, I mean, they are, pragmatic and basic things that they also want to learn, and they need to practice to experiment, but sometimes, it doesn't come in the right rhythm for them. What would you say about that?
That's a good point. And reflecting back on the interviews and what you're talking about, so the sample was skewed towards expert coaches. And so I think what you're seeing is some of that beginning coaching that's going on in the beginning, and that's probably appropriate to be more focused on the skills in the beginning, right? Because that's part of the journey, is to have that focus on the skills, because that's where they're at in that stage, right? And experimenting is definitely, and I'm thinking of where that theme is coming from, is definitely a more advanced type of interactive way for professional development. So I would see that type of strategy more for advanced coaches and not necessarily for beginning coaches, if that makes sense. So I think it's okay to go through the model in a rigid way. It's just, we have to do it, right? We have to fall off our bike and then get back up, and one day we'll be able to go without falling. So.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And I think that's a good point, that there are different stages that beginner coaches go through, be at that beginning, what coaches look like versus after 500 hours, after 1,000 hours. It's going to be very much a journey.
Well, maybe I'd like to comment to what you just said. I think that maybe in the beginning, when you learn new skills, it's interesting to start at the same time with the reflective process, because otherwise we may induce, I don't know if we say that in English, the fact that you have to learn the skill and then reflect on the way you practice that skill. And I think it's better if it's done at the same time, learning by doing, at the same time reflecting. So I'm not really at ease with the idea that you first learn and then you improve with practice and reflection.
That's a very good point. And I think that's the limitation of models, is sometimes they are broken out, but the model in practice is more integrated, right? And so I think that a model sometimes is limited because we break it out and you can't really see that it's a more interconnected process. And so I think, yes, that's a good point to make, that reflection should be happening at the very beginning stages interactively, right? That's a good point.
The other comment, because when I heard you, I was thinking of management skills, and not only as coaching skills. And I see exactly a mirroring between the ways of approaching management skills development, and say, okay, because to be a good manager, you have to know the theories, the practices, and also what you talk about, who am I as a manager, what are my values, my resources, and so on. And so I think that the coaching can bring at the same time to the people we coach this reflective activity on not only what am I doing, but how am I living when doing that. Okay.
Right.
I thought it's interesting because we're preparing a local meeting here just talking about this professional improvements of coaches and managers. So I have a good, thank you for all this good information I can reuse next month. It's very practical. From next action will be to share that with all my communities and the people we'll meet next month. So I'm very glad to hear from you. Okay.
Great.
Will you have a French version of the results of the study?
I will ask to see if that's something that we can do, but I have not, that was something that, no, so it's not in the process, but I don't know how that works. I've only been with, I've been doing research for ICF for the past couple years, but that's, I think, an important question, because as a global organization, the language is important and it shouldn't all just be in English. So I'll ask the academic research team how they handle other languages for sharing the research, because I think that's important. So,
and the English version is available on the global ICF site, or?
No, but I can send it. If you email me, I can send this to you. So I have my email address, and if you email me, I will send you the PowerPoint and also the draft white paper that we have.
Thank you.
If I can just intervene for a second, I will take advantage of Thierry's remark, because when it comes to language, it's not just the language or the words that change, but there's this layer, multi-layer of the personality, the regional culture, the region, the city, the region, and then which part of the country you're in, the accent change, but also the history and the whole interpretation and the way you live changes. And it would be interesting also in this case to see how the coaching methods vary according to these layers. So fun.
Well, that's a great question, and right now we're doing I just finished up some research on coaching in the Middle East, and that I'm looking forward to sharing with the global community, and just really taking a cultural lens when thinking about coaching and how that translates right within the different cultures. And for example, the Arabic language does not have a word for coach. And so I think that is very fascinating, but the Middle East, it's growing just like everywhere else across the world. So language is an important piece of the puzzle.
Right. Thank you.
And Gail, did you have something?
Yes, I would like as a participant to tell you that I'm really grateful for this sharing. Because for me, it gives structure. What I learned is a structure. There are many ideas maybe I had in my mind, but with that presentation, there is something that is robust. And what I will do is that I will rate myself on the 5 strategies. Just where I am, what do I already do, and how can I keep learning by structuring an action plan. So thank you.
That's great. Something that you probably work with your clients to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Modeling the way.
You're right.
Also.
This is Mary. I'm sorry you can't see me, but just as a compliment to what Gail was saying and somebody else earlier on, what really struck me today in this webinar, as well as in a webinar I heard earlier today with Aurélie Chabot on leadership, conscious leadership and eco-responsibility, is how important it really is to think about ourselves as well as part of the system, and that for things to work well with our clients, we have to be in a good place ourselves, and not to neglect that. It makes a lot of sense. So thank you for reinforcing that idea. And what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to be seeking out supervision for sure. And I did have one question. If you could elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by thought leadership.
That's great. That is a great question, and that's a term that I would like to actually do some research on, because that was something that I just came up with when thinking, working with the expert coaches, they very much are taking on leadership roles. And so thought leadership was the idea that came out of that. But I have been doing some just looking around, and thought leadership is a new buzzword, it sounds like. And so I'm curious what thought leadership means and how that's being expressed in different areas. So I would be open to a conversation about that, because I think my idea of what thought leadership is today is very different from that theme when I came up with that word based on the findings. So
and how it relates as well to professional development.
In
particular, it's very, very interesting. But thanks very much, Alicia. That was very interesting and helpful.
Great, thank you.
So we have 3 minutes left before the next webinar. There are some of you that didn't share. Nefisa, do you feel like sharing with us? Or maybe no. Yes? Yeah.
Yeah. Good evening. My problem is my English is not so good. I can read and I can hear, but my English is not so good.
Well, you feel free to share in French, since
yes, but I can read. It's easier for me to.
Okay.
Thank you. It was interesting for me. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Maybe you, Alicia, you do the closure?
Yes, so thank you so much for your time today. And Gail, thank you again for inviting ICF Global to share this research. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other additional comments or questions, or if you do want the PowerPoint, I can email it to you. And then as a final reflection, we thought it would be nice to share a one-word takeaway in the chat, and I can compile that and share that with Gail, just to have a one-word reflection on your takeaway from this webinar. And just entered into the chat, and I will get that to Gail, who can circulate it, and we'll see if we can, if you're quick enough to. So we have reflective writing, structure, link between learning and acting, structuring, and yes, gratitude. I'm very grateful for all of you. Gratitude again, yes, reflection. Great. Well, yes, so thank you so much for your time. Gratitude is, I think, part of that reflective practice, right? So I hope that this is something that you can take into your toolbox, and feel free to share any insights that you have over the next few weeks. I'd love to hear how journaling goes for some of you and all of that. So thank you.
Thank you a lot, Alicia.
Yes.
And thank you everyone for being in that moment, that space together. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.